Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We are diving into a listener stack of sources, an incredible journey through India, the historical and spiritual motherland of, well, more than a third of the human race.
And this isn't just a tour of temples or a history lesson. It's really an exploration of the absolute limits of human belief.
Exactly. We're tackling the most fundamental existential question there is. What is God? And on the flip side, what happens when you believe there is no God at all?
Our sources track philosophies that span this entire spectrum. I mean, you have everything from total self-effacement, where the goal is just to be absorbed into the divine,
All the way to a kind of radical atheism where salvation is something you do entirely by yourself with no divine help whatsoever.
and we'll be contrasting these deeply Eastern views with the more familiar Western concepts of faith, morality, and what happens after we die.
It's dense, it's definitely provocative, and by the end, you will have a vastly deeper understanding of the world's great spiritual traditions and, more importantly, the critical points where they just completely diverge.
And that really is our mission here, isn't it? To map out those core theological and philosophical concepts. We're trying to extract and contrast these different ideas of the divine theism, pantheism, monotheism, and set them against the non-theistic models like agnosticism and atheism that define the major faiths that either came from or were hugely influential in India.
Our source material is, I have to say, a truly comprehensive and critical look at India's spiritual and social landscape. It gives us this historical perspective, mostly pre-20th century, on Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity.
It's a gold mine, really, a gold mine for understanding the profound historical differences in how these traditions tackle the ultimate questions of human purpose and destiny.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we're better to start than with the faith that somehow manages to embody nearly every possible answer to the question, what is God? All at the same time. Hinduism.
It's the perfect place to start because Hinduism is so expansive, so vast. It often presents a real intellectual challenge for anyone who's used to the more, singular and defined structures of Western monotheism.
It's not one thing.
Not at all. It's a synthesis. It contains philosophies that reach these incredible heights of intellectual rigor and abstraction, and they exist right alongside daily practices that are, to be frank, incredibly tribal and primitive. It's a religion of 1,000 paths, and almost all of them are considered valid routes to some kind of ultimate truth.
So let's start at the very top of that philosophical mountain, the higher faith, as our sources call it. This is the realm of pure pantheism, where the ultimate goal is total absorption into the divine. This is where the whole idea of God and existence becomes completely impersonal.
This specific high-level teaching comes mostly from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, the divine lay. And the core concept is fundamentally monistic, which means all reality is ultimately one.
And pantheistic, meaning God is everything.
Exactly. The supreme reality isn't a personal deity sitting on a throne somewhere. It's Brahm impersonal, singular, pervasive, and all-encompassing.
And the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the most revered texts in all of Hinduism, details this idea through the words of Krishna. And this is where the sheer scale of this concept of the divine really hits you.
It really does. Krishna's claim is not just that he is a god who resides somewhere else or rules from on high. His claim is that the entire material universe is literally woven upon him.
Woven upon him. What does that even mean in practice?
Well, he uses this beautiful metaphor. He says the universe is held together like numbers of pearls upon a thread. He is the fundamental matrix of reality. He's the essence of the father, the mother, the creator, the support, the inexhaustible seed of everything that exists.
So he is everything, but he's also beyond everything at the same time.
Precisely. And that's what makes the ultimate goal of liberation or salvation so incredibly distinctive in this tradition.
That ultimate ideal is called Sayucha absorption into this supreme soul, this Brahm. We really need to pause here and dig into what this absorption actually means, because it is absolutely not what a Westerner might imagine when they hear the phrase union with God.
It's not. It is absolutely not a conscious, joyful union of two separate, loving beings. The ultimate ideal of Sayucha is the complete and utter cessation of your individuality. It's defined as a state of unconscious calm which shall never after be disturbed.
Unconscious calm. So it's quiescence, total rest. It's the end of the self. The goal isn't to perfect your character or realize your highest self.
No, the goal is to erase the feeling of separateness entirely. The barrier to achieving this state, this emancipation, isn't sin or moral failure in the way we might think of it. It's nescience, or ignorance. The source calls it avidya.
Which is an intellectual blindness.
Exactly. It's the intellectual blindness that causes an individual to insist that their self is separate from the Supreme Soul. The moment you acquire that perfect spiritual wisdom, that nana, your earthly bondage just shatters and you merge.
The text gives us that really powerful but also kind of chilling analogy to help us grasp this. It says your soul blending with the Supreme Soul is like a drop of water returning to its mother ocean.
Yes. The drop becomes completely indistinguishable from the whole. Its conscious existence as a separate drop is just terminated.
So the focus is entirely internal, philosophical, intellectual.
Yeah.
You just have to shed the illusion of separation. It's a goal of absolute self-effacement, not self-realization or some kind of perpetual conscious relationship.
And that commitment to effacement is so fundamental. It stands in such stark contrast to faiths that prioritize a purposeful, conscious, eternal existence.
But this is where it gets complicated, right?
Yeah.
This philosophical ideal immediately runs into some profound problems when we look at the doctrine of incarnation, or as the texts call it, descent. If the Supreme Being is this impersonal Brahm, why does it keep descending into concrete physical forms?
This is a massive point of divergence from Western monotheism. It really is. In Christianity, the divine became incarnate just once. A singular, complete historical event, seen as the perfect way to satisfy the human soul's need for moral and spiritual redemption.
But in Hinduism, incarnation, the descent, or avatara, is described as a continuous passion of the deity.
A continuous passion? That phrase just captures the difference in scale and intent perfectly, doesn't it? It's just an endless cycle of manifestation, not a single unique event.
It's as if the absolute spirit is forever amusing itself with what the source calls the sacred sport of ever-changing manifestations.
And the sacred books record myriads of these descents. They take on forms of all degrees of grotesqueness, and disturbingly, more than a few are described with, and I'm quoting here, unblushing vileness.
Which leads us directly to what we can call the Krishna paradox. Because on one hand, you have Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita claiming to be the foundation of the entire universe, the most sublime expression of pantheism you could imagine.
And on the other hand, you have the popular Puranas, which are the most widely consumed stories about his life, and they are characterized by, again, quoting the source, fetid, unblushing immorality and voluptuousness. How can millions of people accept both of these things as true?
That is the critical philosophical chasm, the historic or legendary incarnations that you find in Hindu literature.
Yeah.
They frequently lack any real ethical or spiritual content.
Right. The purpose of these divine descents isn't shown to be about breaking the fetters of sin, like in the Christian ideal. It's often just for physical relief, vanquishing a demon, restoring social order, or sometimes even, as our sources point out, for the purpose of deceiving and destroying people.
The source material is pretty blunt about this. It suggests that if you compare the moral quality of the Christian incarnation, which is presented as satisfying a soul's deepest need for moral redemption, to the Hindu avatara ideal, you pass from noonday light into Egyptian darkness.
The ethical purpose is just fundamentally different. Or you could argue it's absent entirely in many of the popular stories. The core observation is this stark separation, this utter divorce between the sublime philosophical ideal of the impersonal divine, Brahm, and the ethical reality of the divine's supposed actions and character when it's incarnated on Earth.
And nothing illustrates this unsettling mix of the sublime and the, frankly, grotesque more vividly than the vision that's granted to Arjuna in the Gita. We have to take a moment to really appreciate this scene.
Yes. So Arjuna asks Krishna to reveal his true universal divine form. And what he gets is, well, it's overwhelming power mixed with terror and an almost bizarre absurdity. Krishna reveals himself as a being of countless forms, stomachs, mouths, and eyes on all sides.
Arjuna is terrified, isn't he? He exclaims that he sees this figure, who are of countless forms, having a mouth like a blazing fire and heating the universe with your radiance.
But then it shifts from that sublime infinite terror to something physically horrific and very concrete. The Lord of the Universe is shown actively swallowing warriors into his fearful, horrific jaws.
And the description is so graphic, it says some are seen with their heads smashed, stuck in the spaces between the teeth.
The deity is depicted literally chewing on the doomed. This is so critical to understand. It combines the infinite power of the universe, the bursting forth of 1,000 suns, with the most concrete, grotesque, and, well, disgusting image of a god chewing on human beings.
The Western sensibility, which generally values a more edifying and morally consistent picture of God, finds this absolutely incongruous. It's hard to process.
The lesson here is that the very nature of reverence and spiritual aspiration is profoundly different. The Hindu mind, at least historically, could hold these two conflicting images: the philosophical ideal of an impersonal source of all reality, and the popular image of a morally questionable, flesh-eating, cigar-smoking deity, without feeling the need to resolve that contradiction.
And that duality, that contradiction, only gets sharper when we move away from the rarefied philosophical peaks of the Gita and the Upanishads down to the lived experience of the majority, the popular faith of the masses.
It really does. Because despite reaching those philosophical heights of Brahm, popular Hinduism is overwhelmingly characterized by polytheism, idolatry, and fetishism.
The text is unequivocal about this. It says every family has its god, and every little hamlet has its protecting demons, often of a very local, even tribal nature.
And the idols themselves. They're often not representations of higher concepts rendered in aesthetically beautiful art. Our sources note that in travels across India, you hardly ever find an image that is artistically beautiful. Instead, many are described as peculiarly gross and revolting in appearance.
The prime example given is Ganesh, the pot-bellied god with the elephant head. He's one of the most universally worshipped gods, yet he's represented by what the source calls the grossest and most hideous idol.
And yet, that particular form, despite its aesthetic qualities or lack thereof, is the one that appeals most strongly to the general Hindu mind as an outward expression of the divine.
Which suggests that the abstract ideal of Brahm is maybe too cold, too distant, too intellectual for the common person's daily devotion. They need something concrete, something powerful, and often something fearsome to appeal to.
Exactly. And beyond polytheism and grotesque idols, you find this deep-seated devil worship or demonolatry, which is particularly prevalent in the South. In areas like the Madras Presidency, the source claims 9/10 of the population are primarily demonolators. Their main focus is on appeasing devils.
So for these communities, Hinduism proper is secondary. It's a mere plaything or a festival pastime. Their primary religious occupation is these ancestral cults that are focused entirely on appeasing malevolent spirits and devils, often using gruesome sacrifices.
And this is where Hinduism shows its unique capacity for total assimilation. Instead of destroying these existing cults when Brahmanism arrived, it just absorbed them.
The message to the local people was basically,
Yeah.
we haven't come to destroy your religion, we're just going to adopt your demons as minor deities or aspects of a larger manifestation.
Precisely. The people became Hindus in name, but their chief concern in their daily religious occupation remained exactly what it was before, appeasing this multitude of devils to avoid harm.
And the daily life of some of these worshipped idols just illustrates the sheer absurdity that happens when these high philosophical ideals meet crass, material practice. We have to talk about the idol's dinner. This anecdote is truly remarkable.
It is. It's almost satirical. It involves a famous shrine in the presidency where the deity is treated like a human of immense appetite and wealth. His chota hazri, his early meal, begins with bread and butter.
Bread and butter.
Bread and butter. And he continues eating without a break throughout the day until midnight, requiring multiple full meals. After the last meal, he retires to his bedroom with his consorts. And this is the critical detail: a cigar is left in the bedroom for his godship to smoke.
A deity who demands bread, butter, human consorts, and a cigar for relaxation. I mean, it is almost impossible to reconcile this practice with the concept of Brahm, the supreme soul that we were just discussing.
It's an unbridgeable distance, really. It shows the gap between the ultimate philosophical idea and the actual practical faith practiced in the villages, where devotion is focused on immediate material comfort and appeasement for the deity.
So to summarize where we are, we've established this incredible Hindu religious spectrum. It goes from the ultra-abstract, impersonal, monistic ideal achieved through intellectual wisdom,
All the way down to the extremely concrete, anthropomorphic, often vile, polytheistic worship of the masses, characterized by demonolatry and idols that demand cigars. It's a system that contains the entire spectrum of belief in the divine.
And now we have to pivot dramatically. We have to look at the systems that arose in direct opposition to this chaotic multiplicity. If our first part was about the multiplicity of the divine, this next part is about the great refusal. And we have to start with the rejection of God entirely.
We start with Buddhism, a religion established precisely because its founder was disgusted with the overabundance of gods, ceremonies, and sacrifices he saw in Brahmanism. This is a faith of pure, self-wrought salvation.
Our sources present Buddhism as fundamentally an agnostic religion, to the extent that it explicitly ignores any divine being.
That's right. Gautama Buddha taught his followers to lean only upon the self. There was no god, no prayer, no priest, and no sacrifice in his original scheme of life.
That is a staggering position for the founder of a world religion. Salvation was entirely self-wrought. So if he eliminated the need for God, priests, and ritual, what was left? What was the core of it?
Only a profound system of ethics and individual discipline. His core teaching, often summarized as the religion of the Buddhas, was purely ethical. To cease from all sin, to get virtue, to cleanse our own heart, this is the religion of the Buddhas.
So the focus was just on purity of the soul within. He was rejecting the idea that salvation could be, bartered for with a multitude of outward forms and ceremonies, which he saw as the central corruption of Brahmanism.
Exactly. But this ethical path leads to an equally radical destination. If you aren't seeking that Hindu goal of Sayuja, the ultimate goal isn't a conscious eternal paradise either. It's nirvana. And this concept requires very careful differentiation.
It's not heaven.
It is not heaven. It is incredibly difficult for those of us accustomed to Western concepts of eternal life to grasp. It's the return to an elemental condition of semi-nothingness, with neither thought, consciousness, nor sensation.
So the goal is the cessation of the long, dreary existence that's caused by this interminable, agonizing cycle of reincarnation and suffering.
Yes. So if the Hindu goal, Sayuja, is the drop of water merging into the ocean, losing its identity but integrating into an existing vast substance,
Then nirvana is the flame being extinguished entirely.
that's a perfect way to put it. Both are a cessation of conscious individual life, but they're achieved through entirely different philosophical means. The Hindu seeks integration through knowledge. The Buddhist seeks extinction through self-discipline.
The Buddhist looks at life, sees the suffering and the endless cycle of pain, and concludes that the only way to truly win is to just stop existing in a conscious, separate way.
Which is why the Christian emphasis on eternal life as a conscious, purposeful existence stands as such a powerful counter-ideal to both of these systems.
But here's the paradox, though. While Buddha had absolutely no place for God in his scheme, his followers later deified him and worshipped him. Does that just suggest that human nature fundamentally needs an object of devotion, even if the philosophical system denies it?
I think it speaks to the human inability to sustain a purely agnostic or ethical movement without transforming it into something devotional. When you have that profound ethical genius embodied in a person, that person often becomes the replacement deity.
And despite Buddhism being the common faith of India for 1,000 years, it was ultimately absorbed. It disappeared from its own homeland.
Yes, the text notes that Hinduism had a fatal facility for accepting, semi-assimilating, and finally absorbing all of religious belief.
It's like a religious Heimlich maneuver.
Yeah.
Hinduism just swallowed its rival whole.
It did. It ultimately declared Buddha to be the 9th incarnation of the god Vishnu. This capacity for absorption is one of Hinduism's most remarkable and you could say devastating strengths. It proved impossible for Buddhism to maintain its distinct godless identity against the pervasive, multiple manifestations of the Hindu divine.
So now we have to swing to the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, away from the multiplicity of Hinduism and the atheism of Buddhism to the system of uncompromising singularity Islam.
If Hinduism is in some ways chaos in its scope, Islam is crystalline purity in its theology. It represents the most uncompromising form of Unitarianism. This stark absolute monotheism, centered on the belief in one God, Allah, is the polar opposite of Hindu multiplicity and polytheistic chaos.
And the Islamic God, Allah, is singular and remote. Almost as remote and unknowable as the Vedantist Brahm, but for very different reasons. And critically, Islam denies the possibility of the divine putting on human or any other nature.
No divine descents. There are prophets, but no incarnations. There's no continuous passion of the deity here. This severity and, highly prosaic nature, the absence of mystical elaborations or fanciful stories, or even elaborate ritual compared to Hinduism, made it very difficult for Islam to appeal directly to the highly poetic mind of India.
It was too severe, too abstract in its singularity.
I think so. It lacked the rich mythology that the Indian sensibility seemed to crave.
And how did that theological difficulty play out in practice among the masses? Did the faith manage to remain pure in that environment?
It struggled immensely. Despite its rigid Unitarianism, Islam in India was substantially debased by its contact with Hindu systems. The faith was so severe and distant that lower-class Mohammedans began to join Hindu religious festivals, worship at the shrines of human saints, and even consult Hindu astrologers for auspicious wedding dates. The boundary lines just blurred.
Wait, hold on. Mohammedans consulting Hindu astrologers for wedding dates? That suggests a pretty severe theological compromise.
Absolutely. The source details how, in Rajputana, many Mohammedans retained ancient Hindu customs and ideas. They would regularly worship local Hindu saints and deities, and they would have Brahmins officiate at family ceremonies right alongside the Muslim priest.
So the local cultural gravitational pull was just incredibly strong, even for a faith as theologically rigid as Islam.
It was. So even the most uncompromisingly monotheistic faith struggled to resist the kind of absorptive contamination of the surrounding Indian religious culture. It could maintain its dogma in the abstract, but not its purity in daily life.
But Islam did maintain its strength and appeal on one critical social front, didn't it? Its absolute opposition to the Hindu caste system.
Yes. It recognized the brotherhood of all believers. This was its revolutionary, powerful message in a society that was so deeply stratified. For the lowest castes, converting to Islam offered a definitely higher social status.
Which is something truly profound, something that, as the source notes, Christianity has not always been able to offer its outcast converts in the same universally recognized, systematized way.
Islam is neither founded on race nor color, and within the faith, all believers belong to the highest caste. This social equality remains its most salutary influence. It provided a tangible, immediate benefit that countered the deeply entrenched social injustice rooted in Hindu religious injunctions.
So this whole confrontation between Hindu multiplicity, Buddhist atheism, and Islamic monotheism, it eventually led to internal reactions, didn't it? Attempts at a modern synthesis, movements like the Brahmo and Arya Samaj, which were seeking a purer, more rational form of theism.
These were philosophical reformations, really, a reaction against both the gross popular polytheism and the overly abstract impersonal pantheism of Brahm. You had figures like Ram Mohan Roy, for instance, who studied Christian literature, rose to theistic beliefs, and sought to worship one god free from idolatry. They wanted the ethical purity without all the philosophical complications.
But the leaders of these movements found themselves in an incredibly difficult position, didn't they? They were wrestling with this desire to embrace the ethical ideals of the West, which were often influenced by the life of Christ, while at the same time fiercely rejecting Western cultural and institutional imposition.
Keshub Chandra Sen is the classic example of this internal conflict. He became the central figure of the Brahmo Samaj for a time, and he was deeply influenced by Christianity. He was an Oriental mystic who claimed a personal affinity to the spirit of Christ. He saw Jesus as a loving, sympathetic, exalted self. He even prayed and fasted at Christmas and Easter.
And yet, despite this clear devotion to the person of Christ, he vehemently rejected the institutional and cultural aspects of Christianity.
He insisted on an Oriental understanding of Jesus. He rejected what he called the Western Christianity, which suits not the spirit of the East. He cleverly argued that Christ and his disciples were Asiatic and that the faith was founded in Asia, which, in his mind, intensified his love for Jesus 100-fold because he could separate the message from the Western messenger.
So these reform movements were trying to carve out a space where they could have the moral perfection often associated with the Christ ideal, but without the cost of their national identity, or the theological baggage that they found alien, like the insistence on a singular incarnation.
Exactly. They wanted ethical monotheism, a personal God, but one that was accessed through an Indian lens. These movements really highlight the continuous philosophical and ethical battle being waged in India, a battle between abstraction, multiplicity, absence, and singularity.
So if our first two sections defined what God is not, or might be in India, this third section is about the ultimate practical consequences of those definitions. We're moving from metaphysics to morality, purpose, and destiny. How does your concept of the divine actually determine your life's direction and your ultimate goal?
This is where we see the final, truly fundamental differences emerge, particularly in the pathways to liberation and the very definition of what constitutes the root of all evil.
Let's go back to Hinduism's divine lay, the Bhagavad Gita, which synthesized three main ways to liberation to accommodate different temperaments. It's not just one simple road.
No, the Gita combined the established paths. First, you have knowledge, or gnana. This is the intellectual path of dissolving the illusion of the self. It's considered the highest path, and it leads to immediate absorption, that Sayucha we talked about.
Okay, that's path one.
Path two is asceticism, or yoga. This is the path of stern self-denial and deep abstraction, which leads to the effacement of the physical self and all its desires. And then third, you have works or action, which is karma. This is where you dedicate your action entirely to Brahm, performing it without any attachment whatsoever to the results or the fruits of his action.
And the high watermark of piety across all three of these paths is total detachment. This is the key philosophical instruction. It's not just about denying base desires like lust or greed. It's condemning every emotion, even noble sentiments like loyalty, ambition, or purpose, because they all cause soul unrest.
The goal, achieved through this radical detachment, is a quiet intellectual calm. The reasoning is that any emotion, no matter how exalted love for your family, dedication to a cause, is viewed as an asset of life that prevents the soul from achieving the necessary equilibrium and quiescence for absorption. If you feel conscious love or purpose, you are still bound to the world and its illusions.
And this stands in such profound contrast to the Christian ideal of self-realization. I mean, while asceticism, the way of self-denial or the cross, is enjoined, it's rigidly defined as a means to a higher end. It's like pruning a plant to encourage healthier growth, not cutting the plant down at the roots.
That's a great way to put it. The ultimate goal in the Christian conception is the perfect growth and development of the highest moral and intellectual faculties, not their elimination. The consummation of life is godlikeness, or eternal life, which is defined as conscious, separate, purposeful existence, basking in the eternal sunshine of his presence.
So the Christian struggles only against the worst passions. The traditional Hindu devotee struggles equally against the worst passions and the noblest sentiments because all of them delay that state of calm equilibrium.
Exactly. So one faith sees eternal life as active, conscious, and purposeful, defined by developed character and relationship. The other sees it as passive, unconscious, and quiescent, defined by extinguished purpose and ultimate integration into the impersonal all. And that difference in destiny fundamentally dictates the very definition of sin itself.
This might be the single most important contrast we can offer. In Hinduism, the root of all bitterness, the fundamental evil that you have to remove, is ignorance, or avidya. It's that intellectual blindness that insists the self and the supreme soul are separate realities.
So wisdom, Nana, is the crowning grace and the only necessary means to redemption. Conversely, in Christianity, the great evil is fundamentally different. It's not an intellectual failure, it's a moral one, the rebellion of heart against God. And perfected salvation is defined as the transformation to his moral image. It's a failure of character, not intellect.
And this intellectualization of sin, treating it as ignorance rather than a failure of moral will, that leads to a damning social consequence that's noted repeatedly in the sources: the utter divorce of faith and morals.
That phrase, utter divorce, is so powerful it needs to be explored. How does faith become entirely disconnected from ethical conduct?
Well, because if the highest goal is intellectual illumination or ritual conformity rather than moral purity, then moral failure just becomes secondary, doesn't it?
It does. The text states that a man of wealth and social influence may trample underfoot every command of the Decalogue and defy caste rules, yet he can stand unimpeached and unrebuked within the religious community. His intellectual status or his outward observance is enough.
And this is why we see the widespread acceptance of those figures known as sadhus, the ascetics. The source notes that the vast majority of the millions of these ascetics are known to be lazy and rotten to the core.
Their lives are described as utterly worthless and deeply corrupt, yet the populace regards them highly. They shower them with blessings and are afraid of their curses. And you have to ask why. It's because their presumed piety is measured entirely by their ascetic denial and renunciation, that outward commitment to self-effacement, irrespective of their moral corruption.
So the intellectual goal of achieving quiet calm opens up this dangerous ethical vacuum.
It really does. And on top of that, the battle for the soul of India is burdened not just by these ethical frameworks, but by an overwhelming cosmic pessimism that's rooted in its staggering chronology. Let's talk about the weight of time, because it profoundly affects action and reform.
The Hindu chronological system is immense. 1 billion years is treated as but a day in the divine time scale. They calculate time in these vast cycles, or yugas, and the present age we're in is the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age.
And the defining characteristic of this Kali Yuga is crucial. It is believed to be irremediably bad. The age itself has a pronounced moral and intellectual bent that is transferred to everyone living within it. The source suggests that this chronological system is perhaps more deleterious to Hindu character than almost anything else.
I can see why. If the era itself is intrinsically evil, then this creates a kind of universal apathy. Why would anyone struggle against deeply accursed customs, like child marriage or caste discrimination, if the core belief is that the era itself is designed to taint everything? The individual struggles are just swallowed by cosmic fatalism.
Exactly. Why struggle to remedy present evils if freedom from evil is an impossibility in this age? This belief that the days are out of joint, it robs men of any ambition to remedy present evils. They become unable to accept or appreciate blessings or progress, even when they're witnessing immense social or religious revolutions all around them.
And the concept of sin is mitigated too, isn't it? If the era is intrinsically evil, then personal sin is just an integral, expected part of the time, making it easier to participate in the common moral failings of the day without fear of ultimate retribution.
That's right. This cosmic fatalism is a powerful psychological anchor holding back any genuine social or political reform. And this belief system, this massive, crushing weight of time and predestination, is reinforced by a vast structure of superstition. We noted earlier how Islam was debased by the persistent influence of Hindu astrology. This is because the whole life of the individual is often believed to be controlled by auspicious and inauspicious days.
Even the smallest occurrences can become monumental.
Yes, the source gives an example where an ass's bray can portend either death or wealth. This continuous pressure of superstition, when you couple it with the resignation induced by the Kali Yuga belief, it creates a profound psychological burden that robs people of efficiency, purpose, and clarity.
Okay, we've explored this enormous space between India's highest philosophical ideals, its popular, sometimes grotesque practices, and the opposing forces of radical atheism and severe monotheism. Let's try to synthesize the three major divergences we've uncovered, tying them back for the listener to this core question of God and purpose. Okay. First, the fundamental contrast in the nature of the divine. We saw the multiplicity of the divine in Hinduism, from the abstract, impersonal Brahm all the way to myriads of grotesque, localized deities and demonolatry. And we contrasted that with the singularity of the divine in Islam, an uncompromising Unitarianism that denies all incarnation.
And the absence of the divine in original Buddhism, which was an agnostic religion founded on self-wrought ethics.
Second, the ultimate goal of existence differs wildly. In Hinduism, the goal is absorption, that's sayucha, the drop merging into the ocean, resulting in unconscious calm and the effacement of the self.
Whereas in Christianity, it is conscious, purposeful, eternal life, or God-likeness, defined by a developed character. And in Buddhism, it is elemental nothingness, or nirvana, the cessation of sensation and consciousness itself to escape the suffering of the cycle of rebirth.
And third, the path to redemption is fundamentally split. It's a split between prioritizing knowledge, the removal of ignorance, or avidya, and prioritizing character, the removal of sin, or the rebellion of the heart.
And we saw that historically, prioritizing knowledge led to that dangerous ethical vacuum, enabling the utter divorce of faith and morals, and the acceptance of corruption among those who seemed pious on the outside.
So bringing all this knowledge into a modern context,
Mm-hmm.
why should you, the listener, care about the difference between striving for sayucha versus striving for eternal life?
Because these foundational philosophical differences help explain the deep historical resistance India faced when it encountered Western political and social ideas. The religious injunctions that support the tyranny of caste, for instance, create these almost insurmountable social barriers to national unity.
And the inertia induced by the belief in Kali Yuga makes people apathetic. It robs them of ambition to remedy obvious social evils, like the disabilities of women or the cruelty towards widows.
Exactly. If you believe you are doomed by the age you live in, you cannot effectively pursue vigorous social reform or self-government. The ultimate battle for political and social progress is anchored in religious traditions that fundamentally discourage active, purposeful engagement with the world, preferring philosophical detachment over physical action.
But looking ahead, our source material suggests a fascinating future trend for the spiritual landscape there. The ethical ideals found in Christianity, like the Christ life becoming the dominant moral type and the cross being accepted as the highest expression of God's love, are apparently prevailing and dominating the consciousness of the educated classes.
Yes, but it's an acceptance of the ideal, with a rejection of the traditional Western institutional form. The source is clear. The Western type of Christianity will not survive the conflict in its current state.
So the future faith will likely be What?
Yeah.
An Oriental type of Christianity.
That's the phrase used. One that fits the Indian mystical mind and spiritual aspect. It would emphasize the Christ life as the moral type of perfection while discarding the Western ecclesiastical garb and certain theological emphases that are, alien to the East. They'll take the ethical core and clothe it in Indian culture.
That is a profound prognosis for a land that is, after all, the mother of so many of the world's great faiths. So here's a final thought to leave you with. If the highest ethical standard in a society is seen not in the purity of your actions, but in the suppression of all desire, noble and base alike, what does that tell us about the ultimate human cost of seeking eternal calm over active, purposeful contribution?